Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Property Rights, the New Gold Rush for Land Agents, presented by Luke Glass, Chief Executive Officer of REALX. My name is Amanda Maroney, and I'm the Education Manager of the Realtors Land Institute, and I'll be your host today. The Realtors Land Institute, the voice of land, continually strives to maintain its status as an acknowledged leader for all matters pertaining to the land real estate profession. RLI endeavors to remain the essential membership organization for the extraordinary real estate professionals who broker, lease, sell, develop, and manage our most precious resource, the land. We're here to provide our members the expertise, camaraderie, and resources that are the foundation for all land real estate professionals to become the best in the business. While this webinar does not count as credit towards RLI's Elite Accredited Land Consultant ALC designation, it is filled with valuable expertise. So let's get started. Landowners are met with a host of difficulties when thinking about how to use their land in the best ways possible, including how to identify all the opportunities for their land to generate revenue, how to market it broadly, what to negotiate, and who to trust. Now, landowners can partner with their trusted real estate professional using a known exchange that provides accuracy, transparency, and automation. Today, you will learn how you can represent your clients in this exchange and market their property rights to buyers in solar, wind, timber, cell tower, oil and gas, and more. First off, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation, so feel free to type in your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and Luke will be able to answer them during the Q&A portion at the end of today's webinar. I am pleased to introduce Luke Glass as our presenter today. Luke is an executive with experience in a software startup, leader of a turnaround, and GM of an established multi-product growth company. Leadership skills built on 1/3 entrepreneurial startup experience, 1/3 investment banker, and 1/3 big company guy. Luke most recently served as EVP at Realtor.com, driving its industry relationships, software strategy, and contributing to this company's overall vision for the future. Luke has co-founded REALX on the belief that all transactions benefit from transparency, access to information, and professional representation. REALX is the largest national exchange to buy, sell, and lease property rights. Luke set out to change the way property rights are bought, sold, leased in the U.S., leveraging the inevitable trend of digitalization and globalization across all marketplaces. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's session, Property Rights, the New Gold Rush for Land Agents, presented by Luke Glass, CEO of REALX. Luke, thank you for presenting today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amanda, and hello, everyone. That description that Amanda read sounded very formal. I think I really am here to answer 3 questions today. What is a property right? Where is the gold? And how do I get it? So let's jump right in. Property rights are defined in 3 broad categories. There's surface rights, subsurface rights, and air rights. An example of surface rights is when landowners lease their surface rights for uses in solar, wind, timber, water, cellular towers, pipelines, transmission lines, and a host of other things that they can do on the surface of their property. Subsurface rights include oil and gas, gravel, sand, minerals, and other aggregates underneath the surface. And subsurface rights you can typically lease or sell, depending on the property right in question. And then finally, there are air rights, which are typically only in urban areas around airports. But as drones start flying around, perhaps there'll be air rights that you can lease to third parties as well. So today we'll focus on surface and subsurface rights that landowners have and the opportunities they have to monetize them. So where is the gold in this gold rush? This is a huge marketplace. So each year, $50 billion changes hands between those companies that want access to this land and the landowners that lease or sell those property rights to these third parties. In addition to that, there's another $50 billion plus paid annually as rents or royalty payments if you already have an existing cell phone tower, or you have an existing solar farm, or you have a producing oil and gas well on your property. So there's over $100 billion that changes hands in this space each year. And we want to put realtors and land agents right in the center of that transactional model, whether you're leasing your land directly for use or whether you have a revenue stream that you're willing to sell today to financial buyers. If a 4% commission was calculated, it would create almost $4 billion of gross commission income annually across the United States. It's a big market with some real problems. So I wanted to focus on what some of those problems are today. When landowners think about all the things they can do to sell and lease their land, they have a host of questions that are largely left unanswered for them. The first is, how do I market my property rights for my land? It's relatively simple when they think about selling their land or selling their home. There are existing websites and brokerages to work with, and you all do that every day. But when they think about wanting to be proactive in trying to find a solar developer, find a timber company, find a cell phone tower company to use their land, there is no great way for them to market those property rights proactively to those third parties. In general, landowners are not aware of all the opportunities available for them to generate revenue. We've listed some of them on the left, but there's another 10 or 12 of them, including hunting and fishing licenses and other things that they can do with their land to generate revenue while they currently own their land. The third is, how do I ensure that my land is seen by the broadest amount of buyers? Many of your landowners and your clients that you know today get calls from companies in these spaces, but they're never quite sure if everyone's seeing their property. Has every timber company looked at their property so they know they're getting their best deal? They're really only getting contacted by one direct company in most cases. The fourth question is, most landowners feel totally ill-equipped to negotiate the deal with these third parties, and they really don't know if they're reputable and legitimate. We get a lot of calls from landowners saying, hey, I got an inquiry from company X. Are they a legitimate company? And this happens kind of frequently out there. So there is a real problem in the space with landowners knowing who to trust and why they should trust them. And then finally, there are millions and millions of landowners across the United States that are receiving royalty payments, somewhere in the 15 million landowners across the United States that are currently receiving a royalty stream from one of these types of companies. And there are ways for them to monetize those today in the world. On the other side of the network, the companies that actually are looking to lease these rights or buy these rights, it really boils down to one key question for them, is how can I find the land that I'm looking for as easily as possible? When I was doing my diligence before we started REALX, I spoke to one of the largest solar developers in the country and said, when you're going to do a new solar farm, where do you start? And that story started with, well, first we send out postcards. And as an entrepreneur, when someone says they start a process by sending out postcards, it's like a red flag goes up saying there's got to be a better way to reach landowners in a space than starting with postcards, getting a 0.1% response rate, and then sending people out to knock on doors after that. Companies have problems finding available properties, can be time consuming and people intensive, courthouse visits if you're talking about subsurface rights, and literally knocking on landowners' doors. It's really hard to get into a new area if they don't have boots on the ground talking to landowners in these spaces, which just adds a lot of cost to these companies up front as they're trying to find the land they need. A lot of the transactional processes are still paper-driven and inefficient. So in residential real estate, in your daily lives, you've moved to electronic signatures and document management, but in this side of the world, it doesn't exist as much. And then finally, establishing trust with landowners can be really difficult for these companies. A lot of these landowners have heard the horror stories of the flippers, the scammers, not getting paid at the end of the deal, and they really have a hard time knowing who to trust. So the companies have to put a lot of effort into building that trust. And then finally, these companies, there are thousands of little websites across the country that might focus on timber and one might focus on oil and gas, but there's no one place for these companies to go to look and find these property rights. No aggregated exchange exists today in the United States to transact these property rights. And as you all know, travel and residential real estate, vacation rentals and commercial properties, There are websites and services out there that have aggregated all this data in one spot, connecting buyers and sellers together. But the area of property rights is one of the largest asset classes that has not been aggregated anywhere online at this point. And I want to be clear here that these are not transactions to buy and sell the land. That exists in your daily businesses every day. This is only talking about transactions to lease or buy specific property rights to use the land for a very specific purpose. And so our thesis is land agents can sell it all. You already know all the people in your communities that have some significant amounts of acreage, and in fact, you've probably helped them buy and sell things over the last 10, 20, or 30 years. You spend an entire career building trust in your community with these landowners. And third, landowners, for the most part, do not understand how to find or negotiate these opportunities. It's a real recipe for a win-win between the landowners and you all as the land agents who've been serving them in other ways throughout the decades. They need someone on their side to being their fiduciary and their responsibility in negotiating these deals. We know you care deeply about your clients and want to work hard to get the very best for them. And this is an area where they've really been underserved for a lot of reasons. So I want to make a few points about, who are the ready, willing, and able buyers. So if you know the sellers and you know the clients in your Rolodex that have a significant amount of acreage, and if you can talk to them and ask them what they're interested in doing, who are these ready, willing, and able buyers on the other side of the network, and what are the largest categories? So I wanted to spend a few minutes going through the major buyers in this space and what they're looking for. So first, in solar, we expect solar to grow by 10x over the next 20 years. So today, 3% of our power comes from solar, but there is aggressive development coming over the next 20 years, and we're going to see a 10 to 20x increase in the amount of power generated from solar over that time period, and that's going to require a lot of land out in the space. The fastest growing type of solar is what we call community solar. And that only requires 30 to 40 acres of land. It needs to only be close to a phase 3 transmission line. You don't have to build a substation for that. And so this growth in community solar is really going to drive that 10x growth over the next couple of decades. The third thing in solar that's really driving adoption and use of the land is policy. So when the city of Philadelphia passes laws that says a certain amount of their energy must come from renewables by the year 2030, then solar developers kind of flock to the Philadelphia area, start leasing up land. And so as an example, even in a part of the country like Philadelphia where it's traditionally cloudy and doesn't get a lot of sun, through tax incentives, tax credits, increases in storage and capture technology in solar, it's really becoming an opportunity in all parts of the country. And so what will happen in lots of cases is there'll be absolutely no activity in solar development in an area. A city or a larger area will pass some laws about what they're going to do to be renewable, and there'll be a frenzy of activity, and your clients will need some help in deciding what to do in that space. On the wind side of the equation, we generate about 5% of our energy in the United States today from wind. However, it's not growing as fast as solar. Many of the solar developers we speak to used to do wind. The economics of wind are just simply a little bit tougher in the marketplace today. You're a little bit more limited to the Midwest where wind is actually more plentiful. It will grow, and with wind you typically need larger tracts of land and kind of more remote areas typically. It's also harder to approve windmills when you're closer to communities. Solar is going to be a little easier. So over time you are going to see wind grow, but we think you're going to see solar grow more aggressively, especially in that 30 to 40 acre community solar type of growth. The oil and gas energy is one of the most well-established, largest, and most liquid of the buyer communities. They spend somewhere between $20 and $30 billion annually on leasing and buying different property rights. So I went and spent a couple of days at Carnegie Mellon's Energy Week to meet with some of the foremost experts on where we're going to be over the next 20 or 30 years when it comes to oil and gas. And most experts believe that 50% of our energy will end up coming from renewables and 50% of our energy will come from natural gas. The real positive here, though, is that natural gas can be burned with zero carbon emissions. The first power plants are now online in Texas. There are some refurbishing projects going on with carbon capture that allows for these energy and for these plants to burn natural gas at relatively low emissions. It's also a big export these days, and so the appetite for kind of gas will continue to increase even as renewables kind of outpaces the growth of these. Exports will allow the continued kind of growth of natural gas as well. These subsurface rates for oil and gas offer the most flexibility. So in some of the areas where you are on the phone, some of your areas have been all leased up. That's actually kind of good news. Your clients can actually sell their mineral rights with that existing lease on it. If they already have a producing well on the property, those are some of the most sought after assets in our platform today, because you'll have financial buyers that'll want to come in and buy the mineral rights with that producing asset, or they'll want to buy the royalty stream only off of that asset. And so your landowners will have lots of opportunities to see offers from a multitude of companies for them to evaluate and make a decision about what may be right for them. And this is the vertical where I think trust seems to be the biggest issue, and that the landowners and your clients out there really want that intermediary to make sure that what's going on in the space is actually going to happen. I've learned more about timber over the last year or so than I ever thought I would. So there's two real ways to monetize timber. And for those of you on the phone, you know if you're in an area of the country where timber is plentiful. So stumpage sales, like in the Northeast, more timber is institutionally owned, but in the Southeast, most timber is privately owned. And so as timber companies go out and look to log different areas, one of the things that happens is if you have 20 or 30 acres, lots of times it's not economical for that timber company to come out. But if there are three neighbors that are contiguous that each have 20 to 30 acres, now the timber company can come out. They can make an offer to all three of your clients at the same time. So the more contiguous the properties can be in this vertical, the more likely they are to receive an offer from these timber companies. And then the other part of the platform that we learned kind of by accident was this idea of conservation easements. There are companies that will come out and lease land to maintain the trees or to grow a certain amount of trees over the next 10 to 20 years. As companies need to buy carbon offsets, there are companies that want to lease land specifically for these conservation easements. And we're working with a couple key partners in that space today to really better understand how to do that. And so we joke internally that money literally does grow on trees in some instances when you can lease your trees for conservation credit. There's a big kind of rollover happening in cell phone towers currently. About 30 years ago, the first cell phone towers kind of started going up in mass. And most of those leases were 30-year leases. So we're just at the front end of all of these leases now coming up for renewal across the country. And there are some amazing offers out there for people that have existing towers to buy out your remaining lease payments for dollar on dollar. Then they'll negotiate and share the upside, whatever they can renegotiate with the cell phone tower owners, and give you a 50-50 split as the landowner. In fact, the companies that own the towers are also making offers directly to these landowners to buy permanent easements for their towers. So more like getting a one-time check for a tower that's generating $100,000 of revenue a month. These companies are willing to pay, up to $1 million for this permanent easement underneath these cell phone towers. In addition to that, there will be another 4,000 or 5,000 towers that get erected every year across the nation to continue to expand coverage and infrastructure, as well as new 5G. Most 5G towers are going to go on the top of commercial buildings. So if any of you on the phone work with commercial properties or commercial buildings, there's an opportunity for those building owners as well to lease out rooftop space for 5G towers as well. So a lot of money is shifting hands in cell phone towers over the next 10 years as these leases come up for renewal, and real money if one of your clients or landowners has an existing lease in the space. Agriculture, probably many of you on the phone are probably more up to speed on agricultural leasing than even I might be, but there's kind of been a shift, especially in certain areas where growing hemp has been an opportunity. So there are farmers that are, able to lease their land to companies that are growing hemp and able to lease it out for more money than they were ultimately making growing their own crops. So agricultural leasing is kind of continues to be a more mature market that's existed, but we really think we're bringing a marketplace to this and are working with some of the largest companies to talk about how to best do that in a live exchange. I mentioned the revenue streams before. Any revenue stream that your clients are currently generating from any one of these things can be sold to third parties. They simply discount it back. It's no different than when you talk about the lottery, taking a one-time payment or payment over time. There's a lot of financial buyers who want to buy these existing revenue streams from existing clients out there in the space. And then there's a host of other property rights like pipelines, which is actually considered a surface right, even though it's just under the surface of the property, transmission lines, hunting and fishing licenses. I briefly hit on air rights, other minerals, rights of way, billboards, and water. So these are all things that your clients and landowners can consider when they think about what they're willing to do on their property. So many of you are sitting in different parts of the country, whether you're in the yellow that kind of represents the part of the country where pasture and range is the most dominant, or in the green where forest is more predominant, cropland. These are the parts of the country where these property rights are going to be the most prevalent. So the blue, special use, gray, miscellaneous, or pink, the urban areas around the country. Most of the dollars in these property rights are being transacted in the parts of the country that are pasture, forest, and cropland. So solar power and cellular infrastructure are going to be pretty widespread across the country, available in all markets. Oil and gas and timber is going to be more localized, and if you're in an area where oil and gas or timber is prevalent, you probably know that just by living there. Wind is going to be primarily in these yellow areas in the Midwest, and then agricultural leasing and other things are kind of primarily in the cropland sections of the country. So I wanted to kind of outline for you who some of those prevalent buyers in the space are, what they're looking for, and some of the attributes that we think are really going to grow over the next 10 or 20 years, and really try to find the best way to connect landowners and buyers to unlock the potential of every property. So we've gone out and talked to a lot of landowners at this point and tried to kind of really narrow it down for you all today on what matters most to the landowners. And first and foremost, connecting them with a buyer is the most important thing that we can do. I'm sure it's the same in every one of your daily interactions in selling residential or land real estate today. But there are a few other things that matter as well to them when thinking about connecting them with buyers to help them in the value of their property. And the first is what happens on their land is their number one concern. And no two landowners are going to have the exact same perspective on what they're willing to do. Some may be willing to do solar and wind, but not timber. Some may be willing to do oil and gas and transmission lines and pipelines, but not wind. And so every landowner is going to have their control about what they want to happen on their land. And it's never an all or nothing proposal. So when they think about which property rights they're willing to sell or lease, it's really going to be customized to fit the landowner's needs and wants about what they're looking for. And in many cases, landowners like their revenue stream that they get every month, but there's always life changes that come around, retirement, moving, long-term health care, that require people to try to find a way to monetize those revenue streams in a one-time payment up front. So all of those things are opportunities for the landowner to think about and think about what they want to transact. I think the second is really when the homeowner thinks about what is that exchange of value, right? What are they unlocking for themselves, right? So what amount of value are they able to create, while at the same time they're maximizing their land's potential to provide energy or communications or building materials across industries. And they're really trying to find a way to help to shape the future of these industries in their local communities. And so this is really kind of the exchange of value, which is I'm going to receive some amount of value for unlocking some kind of potential on my property to generate energy, communications, building materials, etc. And so they really kind of want to evaluate this core exchange that they're doing. And then finally, landowners need you to represent their interests. They need you in the property rights arena for the exact same reason they need you when they're doing residential or land deals. They need someone to take care of the details, answer the questions, be their psychologist, be their emotional support. And the way we think of it is, you know, your new motto as you think about your clients is you can take care of their land so that their land can take care of them, right? And so when we talk about the messaging for landowners is they really need someone to help them guide them through this process. But in order for all of this to happen, there needed to be kind of a solution in the marketplace for land agents, for landowners, and for buyers. As I mentioned at the beginning, no aggregated exchange existed to transact these property rights. And so the solution is REALX, the company that we launched. So at the core of what we do, it's one exchange to list, receive offers, and close on these property rights. So the general thesis is you all as the agents bring the landowners, we bring the ready, willing, and able buyers, and together in an online exchange, we're able to close those deals. And so I wanted to just highlight a few of the things that really matter to the solution. First is transparency. Our online exchange lists all of your property rights. So as I mentioned, the landowner can decide what they're willing to sell or lease. Many of you probably know locally there's a timber guy and there's an oil and gas person and there's someone out there to represent some localized verticals in the space, but the exchange now allows you to kind of help them represent all their property rights in one location. The second is that market your land across all industries on your behalf. So no longer do you have to worry about whether or not, you know, every company saw your property. We truly try to make sure not only do we market that you're proactively willing to register these property rights and lease them to third parties, but we make sure that it receives the broadest exposure to all buyers. This is really what boils down to trying to answer that core question of, am I getting a good deal? Well, if you have the broadest marketing, the companies know you exist and know you're willing to do this type of property transaction, and you've got the broadest exposure, you're going to get the best offer in the marketplace. And you receive offers that maximize your value. So a key difference here is that, one, this is not an auction. We do not put properties up and say, hey, you have 30 days to make an offer on this property, nor do we price anything in the system. So you're not going into the system and saying, we're listing these solar farm rights for X dollars. It's all about receiving offers to try to maximize the value of the land in the process. Because there's no real defined marketplace today, this is what's going to maximize the value. We really want to try to interject trust into this system, which is why landowners are represented by the trusted real estate agent in the system. Individual landowners cannot come to us directly and list their properties. They have to come through a licensed real estate agent. We just think that's imperative for trust and representation and making sure that that landowner knows there's someone on their side that has their back. All the buyers in REALX are verified, so no one can access our data sets unless they've gone through our checklist. We verify that they're an actual buyer. We ask them for historical transactions they've done. We go through and make sure that they're legitimate buyers who can close when they make offers in the system. And then finally, we have other professionals built around this ecosystem for closing specialists. We don't expect all of you on the phone to become experts in solar and cell phone tower economics. We have closing specialists that partner with you and your client to manage all the details of any negotiation and closing. So if an offer comes through the system, you've got support around you to help you answer those questions about who takes the solar panels down after 20 years? How does renewals work? All the types of questions that you're going to need a real specialist to help you answer, we provide through the platform. We are the largest exchange for owners to sell or lease their property rights to third parties today. There are over 6 million acres already registered in the system. Those have primarily come from large institutional owners, companies who own land, investors who have bought land. We have both surface acres and subsurface acres in that system. But each one of you as land agents will have the ability to go out to individual landowners or your local communities or churches or bank trust departments or anyone in your communities that you know controls different tracts of land. You'd have the ability to register their property rights in the system and represent them in this network. We believe we are the largest and most comprehensive database of property rights in the United States today and are continuing to grow every day and add additional acres. And finally, on the solution, I just wanted to hit some of the highlights, which is kind of the no risk side of the equation. When you're registering property rights on behalf of your landowner, they are under no compulsion to sell. They can get offer after offer and turn it down. They're simply registering their assets in the system to accept offers. Second, those offers are professionally handled. We handle all the data cleansing on the way in to make sure that the data is accurate. We're not expecting each of you to become experts in collecting API numbers for natural gas wells or collect fractional interest ownership. We'll do all that work on our side, but we have professionals handling that and assisting you and the homeowner in collecting those. It is absolutely free to list. So when a landowner registers the property in the system, there's no fees to you as the realtor or you as the brokerage or to the landowner. There's only a fee in the process when the landowner decides to close a deal and does a successful transaction. And finally, that's a real win-win situation. Your client's able to unlock value, maximize potential, have you assisting them in the transaction, and they're maintaining control of what they do on their land. And so with that, I've done this presentation a handful of times, and we'll get to questions in a minute, but I thought I would try to address some of the questions that we hear most frequently just before we even get to that section. So if you're sitting there today listening to the presentation and think, gosh, I don't know anything about property rights, that's exactly what we would expect you to say. That's what we're experts at. We know these marketplaces. We've dealt with the buy side. What you do know is the landowners in your communities that you've built trust with, and we're going to be there every step of the way to assist you, from the registration wizard, which walks you through how to collect data. We do all of the accuracy and verification on any kind of subsurface rights. We provide transaction specialists at the end of the process. We're taking what was once complicated and making it simple. I've talked to a lot of brokers at this point that have said, look, we just tell our agents to stay away from this stuff because it's just too complicated and bogs us down. Now there's actually a solution in the marketplace where we take on that complication, and your role is to represent the seller in that process. The second question we always get is there any real money in this? And I talked about in the aggregate that I think there are billions of dollars of commissions to be generated in the space. But even if you just think about subsurface rights for oil and gas, for every 1,000 acres that you can register in the system, you're creating almost $100,000 of potential gross commission income for yourself at about a 4% commission rate. And so there is real money around this. And that's just looking at one aspect of property rights. I talked about that cellular tower where, there's $1 million deal potentially on some of these towers, depending on the revenue they're generating. So we actually do have a kind of commission calculator that you can take a look at if you're interested after the presentation. My colleague Amy on the phone today can get it to you. But there is real dollars in this marketplace, and it's going to be captured by those agents that go out and are the most aggressive at getting these acres in the system. Some of you on the phone know people that own thousands of acres, and you can get tens of thousands of acres with a few phone calls. Some other you on the phone, right, you might be thinking more about people that have hundreds of acres, and you need to get 10 or 20 of those people kind of registered in the system to start generating the kind of potential in the system. Now, not everything in the system will sell, but if your client's land is in the system, that's where buyers are going to go first. So what the buyers tell us is, look, if I'm going to go and try to buy up producing royalties in an area in oil and gas, I'm going to go to REALX first before I start knocking on doors and sending out postcards. So your clients are going to have an advantage if they're in the system. Back to this idea that you don't know what to negotiate in a solar deal, that's what our closing specialists are here for. They're going to tell you what the key things are that you and your landowner need to decide as you go through the process. We're not expecting you to know everything about each one of these property types deals. I hit on this earlier, but there's a lot of data collection around some of these property rights, and some of them there's no data collection. So are you willing to lease your surface rights for solar is just a yes-no question. Do you own an existing well? Is there an existing well in your property today? If yes, then you need to track down what's an API number of the well. We're not expecting you to do any of that or for the landowner to have a lot of knowledge about it. We're going to go out and help you collect that data and make sure it's accurate. We have a team of people here that cleanse data and are able to go out and do that work on your behalf. The other question we get is, who do I target for this? Like, what size of acreage matters? The largest tracts in our system are thousands of acres, and the smallest tract we have in our system is around 1 acre. But we tell agents you should really focus on 10 acres and up. That's going to give you the most opportunities for different types of opportunities in the marketplace. I mean, some things with cellular don't require that many acres, but I wouldn't go around chasing people around that have 1 acre. So think hundreds of acres, maybe 10 as being a minimum. And then at what point in the process do you talk to these landowners? The primary people that you want to target are people that are currently living on their land or currently own land. This is a way for them to monetize it while they own the land, a way for them to generate additional revenue while they're there. If someone's selling their property, one of the things that you can talk to them about is they can sever their subsurface rights, and you can list those in REALX for them. So they still have the opportunity to generate revenue in the future from oil and gas or minerals or other things, and then sell the surface in the MLS through you just like they always would. And then the second is when you're working with buyers who are buying a significant amount of acreage, after they close, you'll want to ask them what property rights they might want to monetize in the future on their property. But again, I think the primary target here is people that you know in your database that are currently living or working on their land and want to find additional ways to monetize it. And then finally, what do I do after I register a property? So once you've talked to a landowner, they've agreed to do it, they sign the registration agreement with you saying, I want to list my property rights with you as my agent. This is where it's vastly different from what you do today. There are no signs, no photos, no lockbox, no marketing, no dollars, no showings. You're really now waiting for an offer to come in. All of the registration agreements that you would execute with these landowners automatically renew after a year. And these deals take a little bit longer to come to fruition sometimes than others. So there's nothing to do once you register a property. We will provide you content that you can push out to your landowners over time about deals that are happening locally. But really, that's then about waiting for the offers to come in. So kind of like in summary, from a value proposition perspective, for you as real estate agents in the marketplace, it's a reason for you to talk to past and prospective clients. It expands your ability to make income by selling a new asset class. And third, it's relatively easy compared to what you're doing today with no showings, no staging, no marketing. And we have professional buyers that don't have financing. If they make an offer, they're going to close. From the buyer perspective, they love this because it's now one database with them for searching. So if they're a solar developer now looking in Pennsylvania, they can log in and see every willing landowner in the state. They can cut costs associated with people and paper processes because now they can make that offer directly to that landowner through you with one click of a button in our system. And look, they're going to go to REALX first to see if they can find land that fits their needs before they go out and hire people to knock on doors or send postcards. So you and your clients will have the best opportunity to get these types of deals if you're registered in the exchange, because now these buyers can make deals that they otherwise were unknown. They would have had to stumble across through those other means. And then finally, for the landowner, there's a transparent price and process. They feel much better that they're getting the highest offer. They have professional representation from you, their kind of trusted community agent. And finally, they have only registered buyers that can close. They know that these aren't scammers and professionals, and scammers or flippers in the system. So we really think it's a kind of a win-win-win for each of the groups across the process by aggregating all of this in one spot and providing an exchange to connect buyers with landowners. So if you're interested in learning more about property rights and how to partner with REALX, you can go to our website, which is realx.io, that's .io, or you can contact Amy McCarthy, who's our Vice President of Broker Services. She's on the phone here today. Her email is simple. It's amy@realx.io, or you can take her phone number down and call her directly. I'll leave this up for 1 second. I would encourage you that if you're interested, reach out as soon as possible. Our onboarding calendar does fill up. So if you have interest, get your name in, talk to us. We'll get you in the queue and can walk you through the process in a lot more detail about the steps to get started and how we get you onboarded. So with that, I will open it up for any questions you might have, or I'll check the chat box here and see if any came in while I was talking.
Luke, this is Amy here. We do have a couple of questions here.
All right.
I can read them off. The first question is, how many buyers do you have?
Yes, we just onboarded our 200th company in the system. So we kind of grow it based on the inventory. So the first acres that came in the system were primarily subsurface acres. And so we onboarded a lot of oil and gas companies that want to kind of make those offers on those subsurface acres. We just onboarded some of the largest solar developers in the country. They're looking at the first acres in the system today, and so those buyers are in there. We now have partnered with the largest, or working out the final partnership with the largest cell phone tower company in the space. And so they're in the system looking at available things today, but will be kind of a key partner. And then in timber, we partnered with a very large company who is representing a whole host of institutional buyers in the system. So there are 200 companies in total in the system, and that's growing by something like 10 or 20 companies a day across different verticals. I'm sorry, a week, 10 or 20 new companies a week as we continue to expand our acreage. So as we expand acreage in Oklahoma, as an example, we then find developers that are focused on that Oklahoma market to continue to grow it out.
Thank you, Luke. And question number 2, what kind of traffic are you seeing on the exchange that you've created, and how do the visitors break down demographically, i.e. types of businesses?
Yeah, so the #1 buyer in the system today is financial buyers looking to kind of target these revenue streams. So if you have clients that have existing revenue streams, there are unlimited dollars almost that's focused on trying to buy that yield. So we met with a company last week. They have $75 million in dry capital. They're really looking to make offers directly to landowners that have producing assets. So this one's primarily in oil and gas. They want to buy people's mineral rights that have existing wells on their properties and make pretty aggressive offers to them in the system. We think solar is going to grow dramatically over the next 6 months. And then we think timber and cell phone towers are going to be the other two that grow the most. So in terms of the 4 verticals that we think are the most prime for owners today, it's oil and gas, solar, timber, and cellular. There is one question that came into the chat that says, could you repeat the needs for meeting a community solar power system? So there's utility scale, and then there's community solar. And utility scale are typically larger, and they have to build substations. It's kind of what you think of when you think about the solar fields you see in New Mexico in the desert. Community solar is more in that 20 to 40 acre range. They don't need to build a substation. They just need to be closer to what they call phase 3 transmission lines. It helps if the ground is relatively flat, and it helps the closer you are to one of those phase 3 transmission lines. So as you register landowners who are willing to do solar on their property, just because they're not really close to one of these transmission lines, and you might not even know that, is okay, because then the companies at least have the option to decide how far they want to run the power to the grid. So there's no reason to not register landowners. It just gives the solar companies more options to choose from when they're looking at it.
Luke, there's another question in the chat here. What's the minimum amount of land needed for most cell phone towers?
Yeah, so the tower itself sits on a relatively small piece of land. I think what it really comes down to is for the landowner, how close do they want to live? If they in fact live on the property, how close do they want to be to the cell phone tower, just from a view perspective? And so, we think, still 5 to 10 acres is still probably the right target. But if the person isn't residing on the property, it can be smaller, especially if it's on the top of a hill or, kind of at a higher altitude relative to the surrounding geography.
Here we go. Here's another question. How do you register landowners? Do you furnish forms that a broker could use?
Yeah, so we have 2 ways to do it. So first, if you're talking to the landowner on the phone or if you're in person with them and you have access to Wi-Fi, you can do it all electronically directly through our registration wizard. You log in at realx.io and it simply walks you through what's the parcel number, what's the landowner's name, and you collect the data and it automatically gets pushed into our system. If you happen to be in a rural area or Wi-Fi is not available, then we do have a way for you to print that out and take it with you, and then enter it in the system when you get back somewhere where you have connectivity. But the primary and best way to do it is just through the registration wizard. It walks you through each question relative to each property right and what the landowner is willing to do or not do in that particular instance. And we have a lot of little tips throughout the entire registration wizard, like what is a conservation easement? So you can explain it to the landowner at a high level, so they can better understand what they're thinking about.
Here's another question. Is there a typical amount a landowner can expect to earn monthly per cell tower?
Yeah, so historically, like $1,000 a month was like the kind of go-to amount for what someone got for having a cell phone tower on their property. However, these cell phone towers have become incredibly valuable over the last 10 or 15 years with the explosion of smartphones and interconnectivity. So these towers are now generating somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 of revenue per month. So the individual landowner is now getting less than 1%. On a typical oil and gas deal, you get somewhere between 12 and 18% as a royalty. So I think what the industry is kind of saying at this point is wow, the individual landowner should be getting much more, which is why these investment companies are coming in and offering landowners really pretty good deals to buy them out, or to buy them out and give them 50-50 of whatever the new negotiated rate is. So if you're an individual landowner with a cell tower trying to renegotiate with a huge company, you're only going to be so successful. But if you partner up with one of these other companies, they're going to help you renegotiate with the cell phone tower company. And I think you can expect $5,000, $10,000 a month or more, depending on where you're at and the quality of the tower that you currently have. So you can really increase your monthly income by 5 to 10x with one of these types of deals, or sell the permanent easement to the tower owner, and that can be as much as 10 times the revenue. So if that tower is generating $100,000 of revenue, you could get $1 million for the permanent easement. Now you don't get a monthly payment anymore, but you get a one-time check to sell that permanent easement under that property.
Great. Another question. Where is your headquarters?
Oh, I am in just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we're in a small town here named Swickley, and my family and I live here, and this is where our headquarters is.
Thank you, Luke and Amy. I greatly appreciate that. And I see we still have a few minutes left. If there's any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in for us. You can do that in the chat box or the Q&A box. But once again, I'd like to thank Luke and Amy for your time today, for your presentation. And then I just also want to remind everyone, after today's webinar, I will be sending out a follow-up email with the contact information that Luke had provided you all if you guys have any additional questions afterwards for him. I will also provide access to the slides. And then I forgot to mention earlier, we did record this webinar, so a recording will be made available electronically on our webpage for our members. I usually have that posted the following day, so I hope to have that up tomorrow. Once again, thank you, Luke and Amy. And if there's any questions right now before we close up for the day, please feel free to do so by typing in to the Q&A chat box. Oh, and I see a question now. For a piece of vacant land without a cell tower, what could a landowner expect per month in revenue per sale? I'm sorry, in revenue per cell tower. So what's the value per month to the landowner for new cell towers?
Yeah, it's really kind of in the same ballpark as when they're renegotiating an existing tower. So now you can start thinking about, instead of that, $1,000 a month, where that was kind of where the industry was a decade or two ago, that you're now in that 10,000 to 20,000 range. Again, it depends on how much revenue the company can generate from the tower, but I think that's a realistic estimate as we think about what the total opportunity is on average, and that's kind of a per month rate. So it depends on the type of company you're working with and the deal that they're structuring. Depends on how many companies they have on the tower. So there are a lot of fluctuations. But I think a safe range to expect would be in that $5,000 to $15,000 range would be a viable range per month.
Luke, here's another question in the chat as well. What's the best way to convince a landowner to sign on?
Yeah, so I think the pitch that works the best is, look, registering your property costs you nothing, and the worst case scenario here is at least you know what your property rates are worth when offers come through. The best case scenario is you actually get an offer that you like, and you get to monetize your land in a way that you're comfortable with, and get no risk downside, all upside. And now your land will be the first land that these companies see when they're deciding what they want to do in our part of the country, whether it's timber or cellular or solar or oil and gas. You're going to get the first look. Because what we have in our system is areas of interest set up. And when these companies, as soon as you register a new landowner in the system, every company that's looked in that area or set up an area of interest gets notified. So this gives your landowners the best opportunity to get one of these deals. There is no better way today than REALX to make sure that you try to get on there.
Next question. How long are typical solar leases? And does the leasee usually pay the rollback taxes and any increase in property taxes?
Yeah, so I can answer the first part. Typical solar leases are 20 years, and that's mainly because when they deal with the utilities, the utility agreement that they sign is almost always 20 years. So they match the utility agreement with the landowner agreement. So almost all of them are 20 years. I do not know the answer on the property taxes. I'd have to get that to one of our specialists. So I'll defer that one, but I think that message came from Gary. Gary, we'll try to get an answer for that one for you and let you know.
Great. Also, do the buyers usually check all state and county regulations prior to making an offer, or is there usually a due diligence period once an offer is accepted?
Yeah, so there's always a due diligence period, and it really ranges depending on which property right we're talking about. So the shortest is usually oil and gas. It can be as quick as 30 days and as long as 90 days. That's when the company goes and does all their due diligence on the local rules, local like what are they allowed to do, where are they allowed to drill, are there access roads, and all that diligence is on them. But they're really well versed in this at that point and really know the space pretty well. On the other hand, sometimes on solar, that diligence period can take 12 to 18 months or longer sometimes because they have to go negotiate with utility. sometimes to see if there's capacity on the line, to see if the utility will buy it. And so sometimes that diligence period on solar can be really long. So the landowner might get a payment up front, and then they might have a waiting period that's much longer on solar. So solar is going to be about the longest, along with wind, and then the quickest is going to be oil and gas. But it's always buyer beware. They're responsible for knowing the local ordinances. Every one of these companies has a government relations and affairs directors that deal with these local communities to make sure they know what they are allowed to and not do.
Looks like we got them all.
Great. Well, if there are any further questions, Amy at REALX.io or Luke at REALX.io, feel free to call us, text us, email us, or fill out any of the lead forms on the website, and we'll be right back at you. And we look forward to working with some of you and your clients in the field.
Thank you again, Luke and Amy. I greatly appreciate it for your time today and your presentation. And as Luke and Amy said, feel free to contact them with any questions. As I mentioned, I will send a follow-up email providing you all with their contact information. So once again, thank you. And I want to also thank you all for attending today's RLI Hot Topic webinar. Thank you and have a great day.